Well, so Yvonne, Hamas very quickly came up with these other 4 bodies and handed them over late last night, local time, after pressure from Israel and threats that it would prevent the opening of the Rafah crossing and halve the amount of aid going into Gaza, restrict about 300 trucks from entering. So it looks like that 3 of the bodies are Israeli hostages and have been identified, and it's unclear who the 4th body is. But it's possible that Hamas was rushing to try and comply and to stop Israel from enacting these punitive measures. The Israeli side believes that the Israeli officials understand that the task of recovering all these bodies is extremely difficult and that Hamas wasn't going to be able to do it in the 72-hour window from accepting the ceasefire to the hostage release. But it believed they would be able to hand over more than 4 bodies, and that's what produced this pressure. So Hamas is now trying to show that it's making its best effort to comply with the deal. Israeli officials thought that Hamas was deliberately withholding some of the bodies, perhaps as a form of leverage. Hamas is telling the mediators that's not true, that it can't recover some of the bodies because they're under rubble, or they remain in areas that are currently still occupied by Israeli troops, like particularly east of Gaza City. And also because it hasn't been able, to go to those areas, and the recovery task is quite complex. And that's something actually that the Israeli officials warned the families about months ago. They said it was going to be really difficult to return some of these bodies. So, I mean, there's an understanding that this is a difficult task, but Israel just wants to make sure that Hamas is making its best efforts to comply with the agreement and return all of the remains.
Well, both sides are looking to the other to ensure that they do comply with the agreement. The Palestinian Civil Defence claims 7 people were killed by Israeli forces on Tuesday in 2 separate incidents. Would that contravene the ceasefire? What do we know about that?
So Israel says that those people were killed approaching its lines. Like, there's a line being drawn in Gaza, and outside of that line, Israeli troops control the outer areas that, on the edges of the main population centres. They still control around 53% of Gaza. And they've told Palestinian civilians inside the Strip that it's forbidden to approach those lines, and if they do approach, they'll be fired upon. So what happened is the groups of Palestinians that were shot were trying to go back to their homes, and Israel fired upon them when they were trying to return to their homes. The IDF says it wasn't an attack. They don't believe it was an armed infiltration attempt. They were just trying to push them back from that yellow line. Israel alleges that the approaching of civilians approaching its lines is itself a breach of the ceasefire, while Hamas says Israel is breaching the ceasefire by continuing, to strike civilians by launching strikes inside Gaza. Both sides are accusing the other of not complying with the ceasefire fully, Yvonne. Another example is that Israel is supposed to return 360 bodies of Palestinians, but it's only so far returned 45. And apparently those bodies that were returned were in terrible condition. They were shackled and handcuffed. Some had been shot. Others appeared to have been run over by tanks. And the Israelis provided no identification for those bodies. They're only listed by number, and there's been no key given to Palestinian officials about who the bodies are.
Meanwhile, a video has emerged of Hamas purportedly shooting collaborators. Do we know when that footage was taken and who has been circulating it? What does it tell us?
So Hamas itself circulated the footage, and only it's taken over the last couple of days. And it tells us that this is part of a long-running, actually Hamas has had a long-running dispute with this clan, the Dagmush clan in northern Gaza. At times it's been accused of collaborating with Israel, of running drug rackets, of running extortion rackets in northern Gaza. It's been accused of supplying an Islamist militia, of having an Islamist militia that has at times fought with Hamas. So it's not a new group. The clan itself denies collaborating with Israel, but Hamas says it has been in recent months receiving support from Israel. And that is something we have seen Israel do. And Israel has confirmed it's supporting a number of clans in Gaza to try and create alternatives to Hamas. Not confirmed which clan, so we don't know if Dagmush was one of the recipients of Israeli support. But Hamas accuses them of that. And it's also a chance for Hamas, as we've seen the fighters, fan out onto Gaza streets, try and secure those population centres again. This is a chance for Hamas to reassert its control, to settle some old scores, perhaps, for those groups that were linked with Israel during the last 2 years, and show Palestinians in Gaza that it is still the dominant faction in the Strip.
And Eric, Donald Trump has warned if Hamas don't disarm, though, the US will disarm them. What does that mean, and how would it impact the ceasefire?
And when Donald Trump was asked how he would do that, he said, "I don't have to explain that." And I think that's because nobody knows. It's incredibly complex. I talked to people, specialists in this field, regarding the proposed international stabilisation force that's meant to be coming into Gaza and disarming Hamas. That is an incredibly complex and difficult task for a multinational force to achieve. That's according to people who are former peacekeepers, analysts, people in the defence sector. They say that's going to be near impossible. So no one has exactly specified how Hamas is going to disarm. The group has not agreed to disarm. The most likely course is to try and find some kind of settlement, as in the most viable course, rather, is to try and find some kind of political settlement in which Hamas agrees to disarm as part of the formation of a new Palestinian security force or something like that. But so far, that idea is not one that's being endorsed by Israel. It's a model that's been put forward in other conflicts, but we've not seen anything like that suggested for Gaza. So far, it's Hamas is being told it must give up its weapons, but there's not a political pathway to accompany that. And Hamas, as we've seen, has armed rivals in Gaza and would most likely be unwilling to surrender its weapons while there's still fighting going on between Palestinian factions inside the Strip.
And lastly, Eric, calls have been growing to release prominent Palestinian doctor Hussam Abu Safia, who's been in Israeli detention without charge for nearly 10 months. How many similar cases are there that weren't included in Israel's release of Palestinian detainees and prisoners on Monday?
There are actually thousands. There were thousands of Palestinians arrested during the war in Gaza and held without charge. They've alleged torture, mistreatment, basically near starvation, sexual abuse, all kinds of horrible conditions inside the detention facilities run by the Israeli military. Their accounts have been corroborated by UN investigations, by Israeli and international human rights groups, even though they remain denied by the Israeli authorities. But these people are held on indefinite detention orders, basically, and not all of them. Israel only regards about a quarter of them as being potentially involved in the October 7 attacks. So there's really serious questions about how they're being held, how they're being treated, what evidence there is to continue holding them, and when they will be released. Like, why are they still being held in detention if Israel doesn't believe the majority of them were involved? So it's a really serious question, and the partial release of Palestinian detainees and those longer-term prisoners that Israel released as part of the hostage deal doesn't come close to covering all the Palestinians who've been caught up and captured by Israel in the course of this conflict.
Eric, thanks for updating us.